So, welcome everybody to this week event presentations on the exegesis of Castelli. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is briefly introduce this and sort of prepare for everybody's presentation. And what I did was, as I read over last night to think how it would be best to help introduce you, was I thought about how we could provide an overview, a structural overview for the argument. Okay. Now, my sense is this, that what really makes this argument fall into place is what he does with psychoanalysis. At the same time, that's the most complicated thing in the piece. So I want to try to get at what he's doing with that. The essay is about the history of the idea that embodied reason is a preferable model for understanding and discourse than the dualism of Enlightenment thinking, right, that pits logos and pathos against each other. So the way he gets at this is that he says, here are the ancient rhetoricians who already had this insight. The Enlightenment got off track, and now modern rhetoric has come on board again to sort of set us straight. But the difference between modern rhetoric and ancient rhetoric is what he uses psychoanalysis to provide. Okay, so psychoanalysis does a number of things that allows him, his argument is that modern rhetoric does the same thing that rhetoric of ancient times did, but more. Okay, so number one, modern rhetoric, because of the insights of psychoanalysis and Freud and Marx and the others, we've already discovered how it allows, in addition to the public manifestation of civic discourse, it also provides private discourse. In other words, rhetoric, dialogue, not just speaker audience, but any kind of discursive engagement, right? But it does more, and if you read carefully, he's saying that it does a number of things to enhance the notion of rhetoric. Okay? So another thing it does is it helps you interpret and delve into the subconscious. So that whereas the ancient rhetoric already had sort of an incipient idea that there were these symbols that had to be understood, it is modern rhetoric through psychoanalysis that allows us to understand that what needs to happen is we have to interpret these deep symbols. So the inchoate understanding that happens when you understand something symbolically at the outset, that has to be teased out. You have to work through that. And that's a discursive process, a rhetorical process. So that's a second thing that you need, that psychoanalysis gives rhetoric. Another thing is bias, interest, values, perspectives, beliefs. Ancient rhetoric understood this to a degree, that we come from a perspective, but what psychoanalysis and Marxist theory gives to the modern rhetoric is this idea that we all come from deeply fixed perspectives that influence, that warp, that distort our understanding, or inform our understanding. So it gives that in addition to the modern rhetoric, which it didn't have. And then finally, it really emphasizes the notion of emergent identity. Okay, so ancient rhetoric had the idea, in an incipient form, that our civic identity is formed in interactions with people in the polis. But modern rhetoric, through psychoanalysis, has this idea that our selves, our very selves, are emergent. Our identities only emerge in the process of interaction with other folks, rhetorical discourse. It also says, and this is really critical, that it's not just our self that's emergent, it's our world. The world is not some objective thing out there that awaits us. It's something that we actively construct. Okay? And that all comes to rhetoric through these new understandings of psychoanalysis, Freud, Marx, Nietzsche, and others. So it really enriches the notion of rhetoric. So I think that's what's going on in the structure of the essay. Okay? Now, I wondered why I was drawn to this essay and why I actually brought it into this course, and I realized that it was because when I was your age, I was sort of having an incipient understanding of what he was talking about already. And what I mean by this is, when I had to make important decisions about my life, and I had a lot of options at the time, about what I should do and where I should go, where I should live. And I didn't have a clear idea about what was the right thing to do. I discovered the following, but it sort of became an axiom for me, which was that if you have both a good solid reason for doing something and it feels right, you're likely to make a good decision. Conversely, if you logically work something out but you don't attend to whether it feels right, there's a good chance it'll be wrong. And also, if it feels right and you go after it because it feels good, but you haven't worked it out logically, there's a good chance that it's not going to work. And I sort of adopted that as a principle. And what I'm saying is, he's saying that also in a different way when he's combining pathos and logos in this way. He's saying they're integral. Now, a couple of you have been asking me, sort of been challenging me on his theory, and I want to respond because it's worth challenging him on this. But I think we can find ways to see what he's saying. For instance, one of you pointed out, or one of you asked, that Michelle Meyer says that rhetoric is a theory of consequences, and they said, what does that mean? Rhetoric is a theory of consequences. Okay. And the way I think we can do that is this: if you understand the notion of embodied reasoning. If you encounter a decision that you have to make in the world, what you're going to see is that the judgment that you have to make about that decision is going to be attached to the lives that it touches, to the circumstances that it's involved in those particular circumstances. And it has to be made with an understanding of the results, the consequences that it has. And so all the judgments that we make are not like mathematical formula that we solve for n. They're going to be highly affected by the world around it and affect the world around it. So our decisions are like tendrils that reach out and into the world itself. They go from the world and to the world. And so that attachment, that integral relationship, is what he's insisting on. You can't disaggregate logos and pathos. That's what he means by that. The second thing that a student said was, this was Garber. He read this quote to me and he said, "The intentional object of an emotion is a person, not a proposition." What does that mean? Didn't make any sense. Aren't there certain objects that, intentional objects of emotions that aren't persons? And what I said then was that that's just shorthand. Okay, to say person means not just person, but our personhood, our worldhood, our being in and emerging from a world. And if all those tentacles that I talked about, those arteries, those entanglements, are inextricable, right, the emotions that we have must be in some way attached to our goals, our choices, our lives, our futures, our pasts, and you can't extricate them. So that's what Garber means when he says that, right? So, finally, just to introduce, and I think it's Andrew that's coming up now? Yeah. Let me just say, Andrew, I want to add a phrase to our vocabulary. Earlier in the semester we said that rhetoric is a coming to terms. And the psychoanalysis that he brings forward says that we have to interpret the deep structures, the deep symbols, the archaic thought, the incipient understanding, okay? And that's a process of working through, of coming to terms. But I want to offer you another phrase, and that is taking into account. Because taking into account is something we normally associate with accounting, right? But the word account is also a word for recounting, for narrative, right? So that when we are sitting on the analyst's couch, or when we are speaking with one another, we're taking account of our lives and coming to terms with it. So if you keep that in mind, I think this might help us get through this exegesis. So let me welcome Andrew to start us out.